Good evening. Thank you all for coming on such a dreary night. Before we start, I should emphasize that I don't know much about what happened in where places in the mill that I photographed. I did them just because they were aesthetically pleasant to me or interesting to look at. Some of them were done for, I started this project, I think in 2004 or 5, I'm not sure which. I think it was 2004. I proposed to the port that they hire me to document it. I gave them a good rate, but I gave them the charge them about half my normal rate of pay, just because I wanted to do it. I wanted to document it before it was all gone. So after they got the first bill, they pulled the plug. But thanks to Dick here from Georgia Pacific, he let me have access to the mill whenever I needed to continue my documentation. Sorry about my speech impediment. I have Parkinson's, so it's a bit awkward at times. Anyway. Okay, this is an aerial I did in 1985. It was commissioned by Georgia Pacific. You can see what it looked like then, before the cogeneration plant was built. Ormond Darby hired me to do this one. I don't know if he's still in the community or not, but he was a good guy. And then in this heyday, this is the 1980s and early 90s. Chips, actually. Reactive waterfront for a while. This is, I think, in the mid-90s when a spark set up a dust explosion in these vessels here. I don't know what, they're just sheet metals, so nothing dangerous, I think. But anyway, these are the centrifugal separators. I don't know what they did, but I was hired by the company that built these to document them. And there's Dick Perry at work. He was kind enough to pose for me for these pictures. And this is a historic moment as well. Let me see. This is the Maersk Taiga, which was the first ship brought from South America loaded with wood chips. And I don't know if it was economically viable or not, but it didn't last for terribly long. But I was hired by the Maersk company to document that as well. So dark clouds were on the horizon. And I don't know when exactly this took place, but this was when the Enron crisis was happening, and they brought in these truck generators to provide power for the mill so it could continue operating. And all the controversy that drove up, we remember that. And now, again, I continue my 4x5 documentation on my own because I wanted to do it for the sake of the community, oddly enough. But the reason I wanted to do black and white is that there's a set of criteria called HABS and HAIR, H-A-B-S and /HAER, which stand for Historic American Building Survey and Historic American Architectural Survey. And their standards are 4x5-inch film and black and white film and archival black and white prints done the old-fashioned way in a dark room. So luckily I had all those skills and was able to do it. And my portfolio got me the job to document it officially for the consulting firm the port hired later on. So it came in handy after all. But I like this one a lot because it tells me, it looks like it should be a cartoon character, an old Disney cartoon or something. And this is the alcohol plant, which is still there. And the rock towers, I always like those rock towers. This is the first building to be demolished. Again, I don't know what it is, I just took the pictures. At the same time as I did the 4x5 stuff, I carried my digital camera with me too, much of the time. So I have many, many digital images as well as 4x5 ones. And this is a digital shot. Found that one day. And these are the what do they call them, claws that lifted the wood chips out of the big ships that brought them up from Chile. Again, another thing that just fascinated me, this was the wall of a shop. Those of you who worked there may recall what it was, but looks like they just took the size of a tank and incorporated it into the walls of the shop, which was good. There we go. And this warehouse I always like to look up too. Yes, it's south actually. The port of Bellingham is just to the farther south. It's on the dock. This is the other side of it, right at sunset. And the old admin building. I like pipes. That's from the top of the digester building. This is from the ground, obviously. This is leading up to the big event here. I don't know who this gentleman was anymore either. This was hired by the company that produced the lubricants they used in the tissue mill. And this was a big deal when Ormond Darby had me take pictures of the dedication of the roller park there for the smokers, I think, mainly. I don't know when that was, in the mid-'80s or something like mid-'90s, perhaps. But that was the roller that was out there in the park that they painted blue and had a placard on it. And then it didn't survive the demolition, unfortunately. These are the tissue mill offices, I guess. And inside the mill. It was kind of spooky to be in there, knowing that not very long ago it had been a very active place. Machines going and noises made and all that. But it was all quiet and like the sculptures now. The neat thing about a 4x5-inch camera is that the film back and the lens boards move independently, so I can get extremely tall pictures of things without any distortion. With a digital camera, you point it up and everything, it starts to lean to a pyramid. The steam plant was an intriguing place to work too. All these, I guess some of them burned hog fuel. I don't know what the rest were fueled. Maybe the cogen plant, when this came online, provided the heat. I don't know. Anyhow, it was interesting to see the place with all the insulation stripped off. It made it kind of bare essentials, as it were. The aerial photos I took of the rock towers coming down was an interesting one. They gave me an approximate, I think it was Dick Perry I was on the phone with, who told me the approximate time it was scheduled for. So I had to hang out at the airport and wait for that to happen, but it was like hours delayed. So they called me up and said we had 5 minutes to get there, maybe 10 minutes, and we hopped on the plane and got there just in time. They blew it down early. But I got there just at the right moment and got about half a dozen shots of it going down. These vessels are amazing. They go up 5 stories, I think. There's very little light in there because all the electricity had been long since turned off, so we had to bring a generator and our own lights to do these photos. This is the top of one of those vessels. Out of sequence here. It'll write itself, I think. This shouldn't happen, but it does. Come on. There we go. I like this one the best. I mean, that was the demise of the digester building. That's what it looks like now. This machine has long fascinated me. I think it was a log stripper, but I'm not sure. Somebody would know. Oh, an interesting machine, some kind of a compressed air device, I guess. Skateboarders had discovered this one. Somebody had set up a tent in there. He lived in there for a while. When it was time to tear the building down, the port officials came by and left him a note saying, "But you have 24 hours to get out of here if you don't want to go with the building." Sure enough, he was gone. Graffiti artists had discovered the place too. This one's from about 1982, I think. This is done with a panoramic camera that takes pictures that are 2¼ by 7 inches long. And it's very, very hard to operate from the air because you're moving at 90 miles an hour, and you can't see both ends of the frame through the viewfinder at the same time. And there's a bubble level in the center you have to keep horizontal. So it's real challenging, but fun to work with. Yes, I hire a pilot in an airplane. There are many guys who do this themselves, and I wouldn't try it, but they do it successfully. I have to maybe slow down on my clicking here. There we go, 1995. A lot of sequence again, but anyway. We are. Thank you. I can ask some questions if I can. If you have any questions or comments, I appreciate some comments.
Tor, were you ever working there when the Caspian tern colony was there, all the Caspian terns? The colony of Caspian terns were there?
No, I wasn't there. The port was very picky about who had access to the site after that, when they took it over.
Yeah, I worked down there 23 years, and I ended up in the instrument shop due to a set of circumstances that I didn't know anything about. Matter of fact, when the supervisor of the instrument shop interviewed me, he asked me what I knew about electronics. I knew nothing about electronics, so I'm telling him about electricity. 110, 220, and so on. I don't know what he thought, but he hired me. And when that place shut down, I was very sorry because it was a great place to work. I never had a bad boss. One of them was, which is sitting right behind me. He was supervisor of the instrument shop when I left. And so it was great wages and good benefits and everything. And I was just very sorry to see it shut down.
I had two questions. One is, why did it shut down? And the second is, the deconstruction happened after it was turned over to the city? And we're new to Bellingham, so we don't know very much about all of this. But so then who paid for the deconstruction of it?
Dick Perry, and I worked with Tor on when he came down to do the photography. I worked 40 years there from 1968 till 2009. The reason it shut down, there was basically if you remember Enron back in 2000, they got kind of a monopoly on the electricity in the West Coast, and we had unfortunately had a 5-year electrical contract that we were in the 4th year of a 5-year contract. We were tied to an index, and when the electricity got tight and was basically being monopolized, that the index went up, skyrocketed. Our electricity bill went up about 100 times what it had been, and so we had to shut it down to try to figure something else out. But all the alternatives were too expensive, $50 million to build a small cogen, so there was not a viable option that the main corporation would invest that kind of money in an old mill in Bellingham. The other question was when did we started the demolition about 2004 or 2005. The pulp mill had shut down in 2001, and so we demolished we sold off the assets first. First it went to other GP mills. They had first choice at pumps and equipment. Then we kind of went on the open markets, sold parts of it to New Zealand and Israel and various places, and then we went to when it came time to demolish the different parts. We had an agreement with the Port of Bellingham. They took over the ownership of the site, but Georgia Pacific set up an agreement with the port that we would demolish half the buildings and the port would be responsible for the other half, and they got to choose which ones they wanted GP to demolish and which ones they wanted to keep. And so they sat down without knowing what they really were going to do in the future, and they picked a bunch of buildings to keep and ones to demolish. So as GP got done with them, we had to, I managed the demolition for 4 or 5 years, and we hired contractors to bid on demolishing various parts of the operation. Some of the contracts, because at that time the price of scrap metal was quite high, and so it was valuable. All that stainless steel piping that you saw in the evaporators, there was like 1.5 million pounds of stainless steel or something like that, so that's very valuable. And so the demolition crews would bid on this, and some of the work was done for no cost. It was just you hire the demolition crew, they do all the demolition, clean up, and they get to keep all the scrap metal and all the equipment so they make their money off of selling the scrap metal and the stainless. A lot of it went to China. Some of the demolition, like the steam plant, there was just the asbestos in the steam plant cost $1 million to take the asbestos, abate the asbestos. So that was part of the bid on that project. The city worked with us pretty well getting the permits, but then there was, when it came time to take the steam plant down and the steam plant stack, there were some people looking at that as historical. Some of the photography that Tort did to document it. We had hired a company out of Seattle to look at the historical value of the various buildings and tried to, I thought there was a lot of things in there that could be used as art objects in the future, so some of the things I was hoping we could save. Some of them have been saved, some have been demolished now. But the steam plant, ultimately, after I retired in 2009, I got rehired back for a project. Took 6 months to finally get the permit to demolish the steam plant and the stack. You saw the steam plant stack dropping at one point. So that was done in about 2011. 2010 we got the permit. 2011 we got the crew back. They had patiently waited 2 years. They'd invested $1 million to take the asbestos out of the steam plant. Then they went back to Eugene, Oregon for 2 years. Finally got the permit, and then they came back and did the final demolition in about 3 or 4 months and got the scrap metal that they'd invested all their time and money in 2 years before. So it was, they're a very patient company.
Thanks, Dick. That was
So I know that Georgia Pacific bought it from another company, and was Georgia Pacific the second owner of the mill, and it was originally built in the 30s? Could anybody speak to that?
The original pulp mill, I think, was built about 1926, 27. But the, quote, modern mill was started in the early part of 1937. And to show you about permitting processes, I have a copy of the permit, which is just an 8x11. It says build a pulp mill and outlying buildings, and the permit costs $332. But they started in early 1937, and by the latter half of 1938, they had pulp coming off the machines. So it was pretty rapid construction, considering that they started with driving pilings into the mud to put the buildings on. So a little bit different than on permitting and doing something than it is now.
Thank you. I was just interested in what did we do about pulling the pilings? And there was a great deal of effort at the time of the end of the mill to increase the purity of the water. So we spent a lot of time working on that.
The granary that it showed there, I believe that was the original Washington Cooperative Farmers Association feed mill. I remember going there with my dad to pick up grain for the cows in 100-pound burlap bags. And those were the days when cars have fenders, and you put a big bag on each fender to take it home. And I'm very glad that they're didn't tear that down, because there's a lot of history involved in that.
Well, I just wanted to make a comment that your photographs are absolutely beautiful and really kind of haunting.
Thank you.
Very special. Thank you.
If I may put another plug for myself, Village Books is publishing a book of my aerial photographs of Bellingham in the Northwest. Should be on the shelf next week sometime. So I'm going to thank Ken. I hope to see you there.